It began with a line my tongue told my brain. There was a foreign object in my mouth, a sliver of something sharp lodged in the tender gum behind my back left molar. I probed it with the tip of my tongue, a familiar, irritating ritual. A popcorn kernel, probably, from the movie Sarah and I had watched the night before. I swished water, raked at it with a fingernail, and attacked the crevice with a length of mint-flavored floss, all to no avail. The tiny spike remained, a minute declaration of war in the quiet territory of my mouth. Annually, I resolved to let my saliva and the natural process of things dislodge it. I was an architect. My world was one of straight lines, precise measurements, and the solid, reassuring logic of load-bearing walls. A misplaced popcorn kernel was a trivial, fleeting chaos I could afford to ignore. We'd only been in the old Abernathy house for 3 months, and the place was a symphony of such minor rebellions. A floorboard that groaned like a dying man, a window that whistled a haunting G-sharp in the wind, a persistent damp spot in the cellar that smelled of wet earth and something vaguely like old pennies. These were the quirks of an old house, the personality one pays for when avoiding the sterile sameness of new construction. I found it charming, Sarah less so. By the 3rd day, the kernel had not dislodged. It felt larger, sharper. The irritation had bloomed into a dull, persistent ache. That night, after Sarah had fallen asleep, her soft breathing a steady rhythm in the unnaturally silent house, I took a small vanity mirror into the bathroom and contorted myself to see. My breath fogged the glass. I wiped it, angled the penlight, and stretched my jaw until it clicked. It was not a popcorn kernel. Peeking through the pink flesh of my gum was a pinpoint of stark, brilliant white. It wasn't a chip from the adjacent molar. The surface was too smooth, too perfect. It looked like the very tip of a new tooth, emerging where no tooth had any right to be. A supernumerary tooth, my logical mind supplied. A rare but documented dental anomaly. I felt a surge of relief, the kind that comes from putting a name to the unknown. I would call a dentist in the morning. It was an inconvenience, a quirk of my own biology, but it was explainable, it was real. The earliest appointment I could get was 3 weeks away. In the intervening time, the anomaly grew. It didn't erupt with the slow, ponderous pace of a human tooth. It grew with an unnerving, almost eager, speed. Within a week, the point had become a distinct cusp, and it was not the rounded, functional shape of a human molar. It was sharp, conical, angled slightly inward toward my tongue. It was the tooth of a predator, a carnivore. Its color was round, too, not the pearly, off-white of my other teeth, but a slick, almost translucent white, like polished quartz. When I touched it with my tongue, which I did obsessively, it felt colder than the surrounding enamel. I started to hide it. I learned to speak without opening my mouth too wide, a ventriloquist of my own growing shame. I stopped smiling, offering a tight-lipped grimace instead. Sarah noticed. "Is everything okay, Leo?" she asked one evening, her brow furrowed with concern as I pushed a piece of steak around my plate. "You've been so quiet lately." "Just stressed," I lied, the word feeling thick and clumsy in my mouth. I had to chew on the right side only, a careful, deliberate process. I was terrified of biting my own tongue, of the damage that sharp, alien needle could inflict. The house grew quieter around me, or perhaps I was just becoming more attuned to its strange frequency. The usual groans and whistles seemed to fade, replaced by a profound, listening stillness. The only sound was the one inside my head, the faint, wet click as the tip of my tongue compulsively worried the new tooth. Sometimes, late at night, I thought I heard a faint echo of that sound from within the walls, a dry, chittering scrape, like a rat sharpening its claws on stone. I dismissed it as the house settling. It was an old house, after all. The dream started around the second week. I was floating in a vast, black ocean under a starless sky. The water was unnervingly warm, thick like oil. I wasn't scared, not at first. There was a strange sense of peace, of belonging. But then I would feel a presence in the deep, something of impossible scale moving beneath me, its passage displacing continents of water. I never saw it, but I knew, with a certainty that chilled me more than any nightmare monster, that it was aware of me. I would wake up with my jaw clenched so tightly my teeth ached, the foreign point digging a raw, sore indentation into the side of my tongue. The taste in my mouth was of salt and old metal. I began to explore the house, driven by a nameless anxiety. In the cellar, I found what the realtor had called the previous owner's abandoned odds and ends. Mr. Abernathy had left in a hurry, they said. The collection was bizarre. Dusty crates filled with antique dental equipment, terrifyingly archaic-looking pliers, extractors, mirrors on long, rusted handles. There were also dozens of glass jars filled with salt, and stacks of notebooks filled with spidery, frantic handwriting and strange, anatomical diagrams. I flipped one open. It showed a drawing of a human jaw, but with extra teeth, sharp and pointed, sketched in red ink. Next to them were labels, anchors, wards, the barbs of sanctum. I shuddered and closed the book. The man was clearly an eccentric, probably a failed dentist with a penchant for the occult. I dismissed it as the ramblings of a lonely old man. Still, I couldn't bring myself to throw them away. I just stacked the boxes neatly against the damp stone wall. By the end of the third week, the tooth was fully emerged. It was a perfect, glistening fang, about half an inch long, nestled snugly behind my last molar. It was beautiful, in a horrifying, unnatural way. And it was no longer alone. I could feel new pinpricks, new promises of growth, on the roof of my mouth. Tiny, rough bumps, like a cat's tongue, were forming on my palate. The boundary between the dental anomaly and the biological horror was dissolving. I canceled the dentist appointment. What could I say? How could I open my mouth and reveal the nascent predator archaic forming within? The lie I told Sarah that the dentist had fixed it, a simple filing, was transparently false. The tension between us grew into a chasm. "You're not you anymore, Leo," she said, her voice trembling with a mixture of fear and frustration. We were in the kitchen, the afternoon light casting long, skeletal shadows from the trees outside. "You're like a stranger. You hide in the bathroom. You barely speak. You look at me like you don't even see me. It's this house, isn't it, that's changing you." I wanted to tell her. I wanted to pry open my mouth and show her the monstrousness blooming there, to beg for her help. But shame was a physical barrier in my throat. And beneath the shame, a deeper, colder fear. What if it was contagious? "I'm just tired," I mumbled, my tongue brushing against one of the new, rough buds on my palate. The sensation was grotesquely fascinating. "I can't do this, Leo," she whispered, tears welling in her eyes. "I can't watch you disappear." She packed a bag that night. The sound of her car pulling away was the loudest thing I had ever heard in that silent house. The silence that descended afterward was absolute, a heavy blanket woven with my own failure. Alone, my obsession intensified. I spent hours in front of the mirror, studying the geometry of my changing mouth. The fang was the epicenter, the king. It seemed to hum with a low, resonant energy that I could feel in the bone of my jaw. The new buds on my palate were sharpening, becoming a field of tiny, thorn-like protrusions. Eating had become a nightmare. The texture of food was an agony against the raw, sensitive new growths. I subsisted on yogurt and soup, my body withering as the horror inside me flourished. The scraping sounds in the walls became more frequent, more insistent. They seemed to be concentrated around the cellar. And the dream of the black ocean was now a nightly ordeal. The presence in the deep was closer. I could feel the water pressure changing as it passed, could feel the warmth of its immense body. It was no longer just aware of me, it was waiting for me. One night, the scraping from the cellar was so loud it sounded like someone dragging a stone sarcophagus across the floor. A primal terror, cold and sharp, pierced through the fog of my self-obsession. I crept to the cellar door, my heart a frantic drum against my ribs. I pressed my ear to the old wood. The scraping stopped. I heard a new sound, a soft, wet, unfolding sound, like a bat's wing unfurling in the dark. I recoiled from the door, a scream trapped in my throat. I stumbled back to the bathroom, to the unforgiving glare of the vanity lights. My reflection was a gaunt, hollow-eyed stranger. My mouth was a cage, and something was rattling the bars. That was the breaking point. This thing, this transformation, it was tied to the house. Abernathy had fled, Sarah had fled. They had escaped, I had to escape, too. But I couldn't just leave. The thing wasn't just in the house. It was in me, it had taken root in my flesh. To be free of the house, I first had to be free of the growth. I had to tear it out. My mind, once the domain of logic and reason, was now a feral landscape. The thought of self-extraction was not horrifying. It was a beacon of hope. I went to the cellar. The air was cold, thick with the smell of damp earth and pennies, but the noises had stopped. I didn't dare look into the shadows. My eyes were fixed on the dusty crates. I found the box of dental tools, my hands shaking as I lifted the lid. I selected a pair of narrow-beaked pliers, the steel cold and heavy in my palm. They looked like an instrument of medieval torture. Back in the bathroom, I locked the door. I laid a towel on the counter to muffle the sound of the pliers. My heart hammered against my sternum. I looked at my reflection one last time. The man in the mirror looked terrified, but determined. He was a cornered animal, ready to chew off its own limb to escape the trap. I took a deep breath and opened my mouth wide. The fang gleamed under the light. It looked alien, an obsidian shard embedded in my human frailty. I maneuvered the pliers into my mouth, the cold steel clicking against my teeth. It took several tries to get a grip on the slick, conical surface of the fang. My hands were slick with sweat. Finally, the jaws of the pliers closed around the tooth. I squeezed. A bolt of pure, white-hot agony shot through my jaw, my skull, my entire nervous system. It was a pain beyond anything I had ever imagined, a violation at a cellular level. My eyes watered, my body convulsed, but I held on, I pulled. The tooth didn't budge, it felt rooted not in my gum, but in the very foundation of my being. It was part of me. I pulled again, twisting my wrist, putting my whole body into it. I could feel the tissue tearing, the warm, metallic gush of blood filling my mouth. I gagged, spitting the crimson spray into the sink. Through the red haze of pain, I heard a sound. Not from my throat, but from the tooth itself. A high, keening vibration, a sound that traveled through the steel of the pliers and into the bones of my hand. It was a sound of protest, of warning. and from the walls of the house, an answer. A deep, resonant groan, not of settling wood, but of something vast and ancient stirring from a long slumber. The scraping, the chittering, it all started at once, a frantic chorus of alarm emanating from the cellar, from the attic, from the very air around me. The barbs of sanctum, the phrase from Abernathy's notebook flashed in my mind, stark and sudden. Anchors, ignoring it, I gave one last, desperate, primal heave. There was a sound like a root being torn from petrified earth. A singing shorb of tearing flesh and a sharp crack of something deeper than bone. The fang came free. It fell from the pliers and clattered into the porcelain sink, a black jewel in a swirling pool of red. Instantaneously, the pain vanished. Not just the acute agony of the extraction, but all of it. The dull ache in my jaw, the raw sensitivity on my palate, the psychic pressure in my skull. It was all gone. A profound, narcotic wave of relief washed over me. I felt light, I felt clean, I felt human. I leaned over the sink, panting, spitting out the last of the blood. The socket was a dark, weeping hole, but it felt blessedly empty. I looked at my reflection. My eyes were clear. The gaunt, haunted look was gone. I was me again. I picked up the tooth. It was heavier than it looked, cool to the touch. The root was long, black, and strangely fibrous, not like a human root at all. As I held it, the low hum I had always felt from it faded, like a dying star. It became inert, just a strange, dead piece of enamel. Then, the other changes began. The tiny, thorn-like buds on the roof of my mouth. They softened, they receded. I ran my tongue over my palate, and it was smooth. The horrifying landscape was gone, paved over in an instant. I had won, I had cut out the cancer and survived. A hysterical laugh bubbled up in my throat. I had faced the monster and torn it from my own flesh. That was when the silence ended. It wasn't broken by the familiar groans of the old house. This was a new sound, the deep, resonant groan from the walls returned. But it was no longer a sound of alarm. It was a sound of release, a vast, satisfied exhalation. The unnatural quiet I had grown accustomed to, the strange absence of birds outside the window, of buzzing insects, of the wind itself, I suddenly understood that it hadn't been an absence of sound. It had been a suppression. The faint smell of damp earth and old pennies from the cellar intensified, blooming into a powerful, suffocating stench of stagnant ocean water and open graves. It was the smell from my dream. My gaze fell upon the open notebook I had left on the floor weeks ago, Abernathy's frantic scrawl. My eyes, now horrifyingly clear, didn't just see the words. They understood them. The diagrams weren't a madman's fantasy. They were a schematic, a biological defense system. The drawing of a jaw, the sharp teeth labeled anchors, wards. They weren't going to turn the host into a monster. They were going to protect the host from one. They were a living antibody, a sacred armor grown from the flesh, anchoring reality in place against something that wanted to pull it apart. Abernathy hadn't fled the transformation. He had failed to complete it. The scraping sound started again, but it was different now. It was no longer in the walls. It was on the other side of the bathroom door. A slow, deliberate scrape of something hard and chitinous dragging across the wooden floor of the hallway. I stood frozen, the useless, dead tooth in my hand. The profound relief of moments before curdled into a new kind of terror, a dread so absolute it was a physical weight, crushing the air from my lungs. The teeth weren't the disease. They were the cure, and I had just ripped them out. Click the lock on the bathroom door, the one I had secured myself, turned. Not with the sound of a metal tumbler, but with a wet, organic pop, like a joint being set. The doorknob, a simple brass sphere, began to change. Its surface corrugated, darkened, resolving itself into the segmented, glossy black texture of an insect's eye. It swiveled, the million tiny facets of its surface observing me in my sterile, brightly lit prison. The door didn't open, it dissolved. The wood softened, turning dark and translucent, its fibers melting away like sugar in hot water, revealing the hallway beyond. But it wasn't my hallway, the space was distorted, the walls curving away into impossible geometries. And in the center of the space, where the cellar door used to be, there was only a gaping darkness, a void that drank the light. From that darkness, it began to emerge. The source of the scraping, the presence from the black ocean of my dreams. It was a symphony of things that should not be, a creature of wet, unfolding limbs and angles that broke the eye. I saw a leg, thin and stilt-like, made of what looked like bundled, twitching nerves. I saw a surface that shimmered like an oil slick, rippling with colors my brain couldn't name. It wasn't looking at me. It was looking at my mouth. I could feel the empty socket, the defenseless hollow in my gun. It was no longer a wand, it was an invitation, a doorway. The wet, unfolding sound from the cellar filled the world, and I finally understood. The house wasn't the monster. The house was the trap, and for 3 months, I had been the bait, slowly being armed, fortified, turned into a sanctum. A sanctum I had just single-handedly, and with triumphant pride, dismantled. A thin, dark tendril, no thicker than a wire, unspooled from the shifting mass in the hallway. It slithered across the floor, silent and swift, making its way toward me. I was paralyzed, my victory, my humanity, my foolishness, all choking me. As the tendril reached my bare feet, I felt no pain, only a profound, intimate cold. I watched it climb my leg, my chest, my neck. It paused before my face, the tip quivering, and then, with an unbearable gentleness, it slipped past my lips, past my useless human teeth, and found the warm, open, and utterly unprotected space where the anchor used to be.